It is a city that does not exist on any map of natural wealth. No oil, no gold, no diamonds, no fertile soil, no river, no mountain, no army, no history of empire. And yet, today, it holds more foreign exchange reserves than the entire continent of Africa combined. It has the highest GDP per capita in Asia. It has the busiest port on earth. And it is home to more millionaires per square mile than any other nation on the planet. The question is not how it got rich. The question is why no one else has copied it. Because the answer is not a policy. It is not a tax rate. It is not a trade deal. The answer is a single decision made in a moment of absolute desperation. A decision that required man to look at a tiny, swampy island with no resources and say, we will turn this place into the mind of the world. Not the factory. Not the farm. The mind. And that decision has shaped everything about your life, whether you know it or not. The price of your groceries, the speed of your delivery, the cost of your mortgage, the safety of your city. Because Singapore does not just trade with the world, it coordinates the world. And the moment you understand how, you will see your own country differently. You will see your own job differently. You will see your own future differently. But here is something most people do not realize. Singapore is not a country. It is a corporation. A corporation that operates like a country. And every country that wants to survive in the 21st century is now studying Singapore not as a nation, but as a blueprint for survival, a blueprint for wealth, a blueprint for control. And that blueprint has a single architect, a man who wept on the night of his nation's birth and refused to accept defeat. Let us go back to the beginning, before the skyscrapers, before the millions, before the name Singapore was even spoken. In 1819, this island was nothing but a fishing village, a few hundred families living on the edge of a mangrove swamp. The soil was acidic, the water was brackish, the malaria was relentless, and the British, who claimed it for their empire, did not care about the island itself. They cared about the strait, the narrow passage of water between the island and the mainland that connected the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. That strait was the only route from Europe to the Spice Islands, from India to China, from the British Empire to its own wealth. And so they built a port, not for the island, for the strait. Ships stopped here not to trade with Singapore, but to refuel, to resupply, to repair. The island itself was irrelevant. It was a gas station, a parking lot, a place where ships paused before continuing on to richer destinations. And for 100 years, that was all Singapore was. A British outpost, a colonial convenience, a footnote in the geography of empire. The people who lived there were mostly migrants from China, from India, from the Malay archipelago. They worked as coolies, as clerks, as traders. They built nothing. They owned nothing. They were not citizens of any nation. They were subject of a crown that did not see them as equals. Then came the Second World War, and everything changed. In 1942, the Japanese invaded. They swept through the British defenses. In just 7 days, the British surrendered. And for the next 3 years, Singapore was occupied by an empire that treated the local population as slaves. Thousands died. Families were separated. Children starved. The illusion of British protection collapsed forever. When the war ended, the British returned. But the people of Singapore had seen something. They had seen their colonial masters fall. They had seen their own resilience. And they began to ask a question that had never been asked before. If the British could be beaten, why could they not rule themselves? And so the independence movement began, not with violence, not with revolution, but with a quiet, determined refusal to accept the old order. In 1959, Singapore was granted self-government. In 1963, it merged with Malaya to form the new nation of Malaysia. And for a brief moment, it seemed the island had found a future. But that future lasted exactly 23 months. And in those 23 months, something happened that changed the course of history. The leaders of Malaysia began to fear Singapore. They feared its Chinese majority. They feared its labor unions. They feared its ambition. And they decided that Singapore was a threat, not a partner. A threat, And so, on August 9th, 1965, they expelled Singapore, not with a war, not with a treaty, with a simple, cold announcement. You are no longer part of us. Kuan Yew sat in his office that night and wept. He knew what was coming. No army, no resources, no allies, no economy, no water, no food. A tiny island surrounded by hostile neighbors, abandoned by the empire, rejected by its own people. He later wrote, I had to go through the agony of thinking that we were going to be wiped out. I had sleepless nights. I wondered whether I had done something wrong. But he did not resign. He did not flee. He did not beg for help. He did something else. He summoned the island's leaders and told them this. We have no natural resources. We have no strategic depth. We have no army. But we have one thing. We have ourselves. And if we can make ourselves useful to the world in a way that no one else can, we will survive. Not just survive. We will dominate. And so he began to build. Not buildings. Not factories. Not roads. First, he built trust. He went to the unions and told them, we will protect your rights, but you must stop striking. He went to businesses and told them, we will keep your taxes low, but you must invest here. He went to the neighbors and told them, we will not threaten you, but you must trade with us. And one by one, the pieces fell into place. But the single most important piece was something no one saw coming. Kuan Yew did not build an industrial base. He built a language. He declared that English would be the primary language of education, of government, of business, not because he loved the British, but because English was the language of global trade. And if Singapore spoke English, it could talk to New York, to London, to Tokyo, to Hong Kong without a translator. It seems small now, but it was not small. It was radical, because every other nation at that time was rejecting colonialism. They were rejecting the language of their oppressors. They were reclaiming their own identity. But Kuan Yew understood something that almost no other leader understood. Identity is not built on language. It is built on success. And success required English. So Singapore became the only nation in Asia where Chinese, Malay, Indian, and Eurasian children sat in the same classroom, learned the same language, and competed for the same future. And within one generation, they created a workforce that was not just educated. It was connected. And that connected workforce became the engine of something unprecedented. Not just an economy, but a system. A system that could process information faster than any other in the world. Now, watch what happened next. The world was changing. In the 1970s, the United States began moving its manufacturing to Asia. Japan was rising. South Korea was rising. Taiwan was rising. But all of them had one problem. They were not connected to the global financial system. They did not have the banks. They did not have the insurance. They did not have the legal frameworks to handle international trade. Singapore did. Because Kuan Yew had invited the biggest banks in the world to open offices in Singapore. He had invited the biggest shipping lines. He had invited the biggest oil companies. He had built not just a port. He had built a system that could process container, insure it, finance it, and ship it to the other side of the world within hours. And then, in the 1980s, he did something even bolder. He built Changi Airport. At the time, it was one of the most expensive infrastructure projects in the world. People called it a folly. They said, why does a tiny island need an airport that can handle 50 million passengers a year? But Kuan Yew understood something. The world was becoming faster. The old era of shipping was being overtaken by the era of air travel. And if Singapore controlled the air, it would control the flow of people, ideas, and capital. And he was right. Today, Changi Airport is the busiest transit hub in Asia. It connects more cities to more countries than any other airport in the region. And every passenger who passes through it must spend money, must eat, must sleep, must shop, and every dollar they spend stays in Singapore. But the real secret is not the port. It is not the airport. It is not the language. It is not the banking system. The real secret is the invisible contract that Kuan Yew made with the people of Singapore. He told them, We will give you the highest standard of living in Asia. We will give you the best healthcare, the best education, the best housing, the best safety. But in return, you must trust us. You must obey the law. You must not protest. You must not strike. You must not challenge the system. You must accept that the government knows better than you. And for 50 years, the people accepted that contract, not because they were afraid, but because it worked. Because every year their wages went up, their homes became bigger, their children got better jobs, their country became richer, and the rest of the world watched in disbelief. How did a swamp become a superpower? How did a city with no resources become the wealthiest in Asia? But here's what the world did not see. The contract was not just about money. It was about identity. And identity, when it is built on obedience, always comes with a cost. That cost is now beginning to surface. Singapore today is one of the most unequal countries in the developed world. The rich are richer than anywhere else. The poor are poorer than anywhere else. The foreign workers who clean the streets, build the buildings, and cook the food are not citizens. They are not residents. They are temporary workers who cannot marry, cannot settle, cannot have children. They're invisible. And the citizens who benefit from their labor do not want to see them. The population is aging faster than almost any other. The birth rate is lower than almost any other. And the government is now paying citizens to have babies. Millions of dollars in cash, in housing, in education. And still, the birth rate declines. Why? Because the children of Singapore are not growing up in a nation. They are growing up in a corporation that demands excellence, obedience, and sacrifice. A corporation that pays well, but does not offer meaning. And meaning, you must understand, cannot be imported. It cannot be legislated. It cannot be bought. Let's look at the numbers. In 2023, Singapore's fertility rate dropped to 0.97. That is below replacement level. That means every generation is shrinking. And a shrinking generation means a shrinking workforce. And a shrinking workforce means a shrinking economy. And a shrinking economy means that the wealth Singapore built over 50 years could begin to erode within a single generation. So, where does Singapore go from here? It faces a choice. One future. The government continues to control everything. The economy continues to grow. The rich continue to get richer. The foreign workers continue to stay invisible, and the citizens continue to obey. But the birth rate continues to fall. The population continues to age, and the social contract begins to crack. Because a nation that does not have children does not have a future. Future. Singapore opens itself to deeper democracy. It allows more voices. It allows more protest. It allows more uncertainty. And the economy slows. The investors become nervous. The stability that made Singapore unique begins to erode. But the birth rate rises. The population stabilizes. And a new generation begins to define what Singapore means to them. Not as a corporation, but as a home. Which future will it choose? No one knows. But one thing is certain. The world is watching. Because Singapore has always been a mirror. It reflects the choices we make about power, about control, about freedom. And right now, it is reflecting something we do not want to see. The wealth came from a singular vision. The wealth came from extraordinary sacrifice. The wealth came from a man who wept in his office on the night of his nation's birth and refused to accept defeat. But the wealth also came from silence, from obedience, from the quiet acceptance that the state knows better. And that is a question Singapore is asking itself today. And it is a question that every nation will eventually have to answer. When the state is strong, do we feel safe? When the state controls everything, do we feel free? When the state gives us everything, do we feel alive? The map never lies. But the people drawing it always have a reason. Singapore drew its map with ink and blood and ambition, and it became the richest country in Asia. But the ink is drying, the blood is thinning, and the ambition is running into a wall that no amount of money can break through. That wall is the human heart, and the human heart cannot be engineered. It cannot be planned. It cannot be controlled. The human heart wants freedom. Singapore gave its people wealth. It gave them safety. It gave them order, but it forgot to give them room to dream. And a nation that does not dream is not a nation. It is a machine. And machines, no matter how well built, eventually break.